everyone, and thank you for joining us today's conversation that's building better architecture practices. My name is Brian, and I will be your host and moderator on behalf of Virtual Building Studio. At Virtual Building Studio, we support architects, engineers, contractors, consultants, and other AC professionals with technology-enabled solutions and scalable delivery capabilities that help improve project workflows and extend production capacity. By combining industry expertise, digital technologies, and experienced team, we help firms work more efficiently, collaborate more effectively, and deliver better projects outcomes. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all the registered attendees after the webinar. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature. We'll reserve time at the end of the session to address as many questions as possible. If we are unable to answer your question live, we'll ensure it reaches our speaker afterwards. Today, we are going to look beyond simple designing great projects and talk about something every growing architecture practice has to deal with. How do you build a better practice while continuing to deliver great work? To help us explore that, I'm pleased to be joined by Alec Whitten, Strategic Advisor to Virtual Building Studio and founder of Whitten Architects. Alec is a practicing architect with extensive experience in modern residential architecture, project delivery, and realities of running and growing an architecture practice. Alec brings a particularly valuable perspective to this conversation because he has experienced these challenges firsthand, balancing design, quality, clients, project delivery, resources, technology, and the realities of running a practice. We are going to talk about what actually makes an architecture practice better, not just the tools or systems we adopt, but how we build, process, and teams that genuinely work, how we deal with growth and complexity, and how we make improvements that actually stick. Alec, welcome. It's great to have you with us today. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Brian. And hi, everyone. I'm Alec, and I'm an architect. As Brian mentioned, I have a small-scale residential firm in Los Angeles, and I founded it in 2016. When I started, architecture was architecture. I used many of the same practices I'd grown up in the industry using, and then COVID hit, and I found my entire outlook being challenged by the new realities of the architecture profession. The idea that my project types were shifting to a greater quantity, smaller scale, but still clients wanting the same degree of attention and care that I had always given my clients before. So the challenges that immediately had to be overcome were, how do I increase capacity? And that got me thinking in great detail about how it was I was operating, how I needed to shift my operational practices in a way that was sustainable, and could enhance what I was already doing. So not just change, but improvement. And I think, like many of you, I wanted to be better at what I was doing. And each of these challenges, whether it was capacity in my pipeline, or time spent designing, or time spent working with the clients, how was I going to maintain my level of care within the new reality of the smaller, more plentiful project type? As everybody wanted to add an ADU or a home office addition rather than building a new home. This was really the first challenge for me. And at the time, I was on my own doing everything myself, from drafting renderings, all the way through the process, construction administration, permitting, everything, as a sole practitioner does. And I realized that that wasn't working. I only had so much time, and the stress was eating away at me. And so I had to evaluate how I was operating my business in a way that really challenged the fundamental concept of what I had learned as an emerging architect 20 years before. And, you know, as the architecture profession has become more complex over the millennia, starting with, you know, the medieval cathedral builders to the studios of Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and with the emergence of AutoCAD and then Revit, everything has become more complex. Structural engineering has been more complex. And we took that out of the architectural world and brought in the engineering consultants at some point in that evolution. Same with MEP. Now we're starting to see more in terms of expediters and other specialty consultants. And so from a production point of view, I needed to figure out how to increase my capacity. And, you know, the barriers that were out there were cost, time, and just the ability to dive into whatever I was bringing on as a tool to help me. So I'd like you to take a moment, think about what the biggest barrier you're seeing right now to improving your practice. And Brian's going to push a poll for you. So, you know, what I found very quickly was, as I had to increase my pipeline to maintain the cash flow and to meet my targets, I was adding more complexity as well. So, you know, there's always that sort of magic bullet that's being touted by some salesperson, whether it's this piece of software or this organization or this service that's going to make your life easier. And the reality is, every time you do something like that, there's a moment where you start to question if the time invested in it is really worth it for that thing, because you're adding that complexity. It may be that you're needing to add a new project manager, or bring on somebody who understands the software that you're trying to work with better than you can learn. And so the problem I faced was, every time I looked at something, it made everything I was doing more complex relative to the payoff I was getting with capacity. And when I really sat down and thought about it and looked at what I was doing, a lot of the issues I was having was the inability to spend the time needed to truly integrate what I was trying to adopt. So, for instance, a piece of project management software that was going to organize everything for me, and it's all going to be one place. The time it would take to use it and customize it, I would already be 2 or 3 projects down the road, and the software would start to gather dust as I paid the subscription fees, etc. So I looked at bringing on personnel. As a small scale firm, bringing on a local emerging professional, a student straight out of school or 1 or 2 years experience, I wouldn't be able to sort of absorb that cost during the period where I'd be teaching them how to do things the way I wanted. And this became a recurring theme. I didn't want to lose what I felt made my practice good in the first place, which was time spent with the clients, quality of design and iterative design with the clients. There was a lot of time that was being spent doing other little things that I felt was compromising with that quality time. And so I started to look at the various tools I was using in a much more critical way. What could be retained and truly integrated, and what should I jettison because I was never going to spend the time to bring it fully on board. And that ranged from things like a 3D printer to the project management software. I knew very early on I was never going to become proficient enough at Revit because I was too old school. So again, another question for you guys: what is that piece of tech or tool that's sort of gathering dust in the corner? That thing that you had high hopes for and never really paid off the way you hoped it would, because that's where I got to, that so much was just not being used in the way it should have been used. And so I started to look at what I was doing, being very critical, and I had a couple of failed experiments. One, I looked to offshore a project where I signed up to have a offshore company set up my project. I'd start with the sketches, and eventually they'd produce construction documents. And the communication with the initial sign up was not clear. A lot of that's on me, but they felt like I would give them sketches, they would produce construction documents, end of story. I was looking for an iterative process where we could go back and forth. I thought I was clear about that in the discussions, and it would be built in. And ultimately, the change orders wound up costing me more than the project itself was bringing in. And that was a backbreaker right there. So I went back to doing it the way I had been, spending all my time, not spending the time I wanted to with my kids, my family, etc., trying to make this work. And I looked at then Virtual Building Studio. This is about 4.5, 5 years ago, and really thought about what I was trying to get out of the process, and having a dedicated resource, not just month to month, but year over year, where it wasn't just a me provide input, then provide output cycle, but an opportunity to teach that resource how I wanted things done. Not just the standards, but really the whys of why we were drawing something this way, why this drawing needed to look the way it looked, why the schedules needed to be organized the way they needed to be organized. All these things that I was actually drawing on my experience from back before AutoCAD in the hand-drawn era, and allowing them to figure out how to get the tech to do what I wanted. And suddenly I had more time. And this was the light bulb moment for me. That moment of, the more time I spend with them, the bigger the payoff, and the truly integrating what went from one person, one resource, to 4 resources. They became a team that I relied on to handle a lot of the things in the way that I wanted them handled, not just what I was telling them I needed, but thinking about what my comments were going to be and anticipating them. And the better we got to know each other, and the more we talked and the more I taught, and this I think was sort of the moment of realization that wanting to teach them how to think and be better architects on their own allowed me to get better results from them with regard to my architecture. They were no longer thinking as draftspeople, but really as members of Whitten Architects. And we got to that point where now we can communicate in shorthand. There's a lot of opportunity to for them to offer suggestions, bring in some of their own thoughts of how something can go, to challenge me. And that's something where it only comes with a great deal of trust, but the time it took to build that trust actually took quite a while. But I saw the payoff of the investment as I went through. And they, at one point, I had started them with my AutoCAD drawings, like, okay, I understand AutoCAD, let's keep going with AutoCAD. They said, let us port you over to Revit. Let's do the full BIM model. And they presented to me why they felt this would be an efficient way to improve our systems. And, you know, fantastic. That was amazing, because I didn't need to micromanage the whole process. And I trusted them because they were now an integral part of how I was running my architecture firm. And it allowed me to think differently too about what is happening in LA or California versus what's happening to India. It was, you know, what are they capable of doing? What do I actually need boots on the ground in California for? And now it's allowed me to rethink some of how I'm going to grow in the future as well, knowing that with the people that I've added through VBS and the technology that they've brought to the table, we can do a lot more. And all those little things that I knew eventually when I got big enough, I'd want to add to the process, things that, you know, as a young architect working in another firm, it's like, oh, if we could just do this too, the project would be so much better. Even, you know, being a jaded old architect now, it's like, I still want to do those little things better. And I think that that's something that's true of all of us, is how do we enhance our process? How do we enhance our communication? And, you know, as my pipeline slowed a couple of times, I found out that I had members of my team who could do amazing renderings, and not just the photorealistic renderings at the end of the project that you use for marketing, but process-oriented renderings, sketch format, the things that I had been used to seeing in graduate school and undergrad, in first office, the artistic qualities that really help visualize architecture before you know what the building truly is. And now those skills have become an integral part of our process. Very early in the design discussion with the clients, we're presenting visual options that the client can engage with and understand and viscerally respond to, not just floor plans. This is taking the place of the old school physical model. You know, again, the 3D printer gathering dust in my corner never really paid off as a rapid prototyper that I had hoped it would. Now there's the new thing is AI, and we all know that AI has had some limitations as far as where it is now for the architectural practice. It still wants to put the toilet in the middle of the living room if you ask it to design something, because the toilet is important. But as an augmentative assistant, it's invaluable. And I just found out that my team has been implementing some AI tools to help them be more productive and get things turned around more quickly. So we're able to do more with fewer people on that level. And again, I have been minimally involved with that evolution, but am realizing the payoff in our overall workflow. And so this has been an eye-opener as far as, you know, how quickly we're able to turn around changes, how quickly we're able to move a design process or documentation process along, how quickly we're able to respond to plan check corrections. And, you know, having the asynchronous time frame as well, where I'm working during the day, they're working during my night, and we have a little bit of overlap to discuss things, has been even more efficient. So, you know, as I look at all these ways I've managed to reinvent my firm over the last 5-6 years, I'm even more excited for what it means moving into the future. So, you know, I talked a little bit about the technology. Obviously, AI is promising the world right now. The reality is it's not there yet. But where do you think the technology can really sort of pay off for you today? Not tomorrow, but today. Yeah, getting back to the visualization, there's so much more than that marketing image you have at the end of each phase, where you have something to push into the world before the building becomes a reality, whether that's at the end of schematic design, right before construction starts, once everything's been decided. I think for a while I had lost sight of iterative renderings as a design tool. AutoCAD isn't really good for that. Time didn't allow me to hand sketch as many perspectives as I would want. You know, sketching stairs and going through different stair railing designs is cumbersome, but the technology is there now, where if you have the people who know how to do it and are really proficient with it, you can get these iterative processes back into the design process. And that might be an emerging professional in-house or someone abroad, whomever, but it reintroduced itself as an important part of how we communicate with the client, and, you know, even with the contractor or consultants or within our own teams. That visual communication that is in 3 dimensions, very specific moments, broad picture, etc. It allows us to get back to that architecture that I think we all entered the profession wanting to do. You know, so we get into this idea of repetitive work, which seems to be the overall winner on what technology could make the biggest difference for us. And I agree wholeheartedly that repetitive work, you know, where there's so much that we do on every project, boilerplate, things that just need to be added to every project. Technology can help with that, can help build out our templates, etc. And really my goal with my team was to reduce any new project to line work, notes, and dimensions as far as what we were changing in our drawing set. You know, that they would be able to handle all the other stuff, the stuff at the front with jurisdictional information, property information, schedules, general notes, all of that. The template is set up. We're just plugging in what makes each project unique. And again, that allows more time for what I like to think of as the true architecture that makes us who we are. It helps us feel fulfilled in what we're doing. I have been relieved of the duties of the day-to-day production by my team, and that's been a fantastic thing. But I'm still in control of the design that's going through the process, the product that's going out the door. I'm reviewing all the drawings for completeness and coordination and all that, because ultimately I'm responsible for what goes out the door. But it's so much easier now that that's almost a relaxing task. And then again, getting back into that iterative process where what we learned on one project translates into the next, and maybe we add a feature or we add a section of drawings, and that automatically becomes part of our office standard for all future projects, because it's now become a template. It's allowed us to streamline the boring bits, if you will, and really engage in the exciting bits. I still find that I have a limited capacity for number of clients at any given time, but it's the time I spend with those clients that's now limiting my pipeline, and not the back end time, the coordination time, all of that had been a huge burden going into or coming out of COVID. Where I mentioned earlier that it allowed me to sort of reevaluate how I thought about my firm. Starting with, at the top level, fewer fires to put out. I can focus on strategy, project acquisition, client relations, and design. I also wear the project architect, project manager hat for my firm, because it's me. And some of those tasks I'm able to push onto the production team as well when it comes to coordination, etc. So I'm able to spend less time dealing with the tiny little things and more time teaching and leading my team. And then, as I mentioned, thinking about bringing somebody on in California locally now has taken on a completely different role. So instead of putting them behind a computer and saying, you're going to learn how a building goes together by drawing it, it's going to be more time spent in the field, talking to the contractors, talking to the clients, understanding how to run a meeting on site, understanding some of the little things that go on behind the scenes that make a project go smoothly. Because what I found is that as we evolved from the hand-drawn, where every line meant something very important, it was a pain in the butt to erase, to AutoCAD, where we were still building everything by lines, to now the BIM models, where we have wall families that are already assembled for us. The actual drawing of the project no longer holds the same meaning as far as understanding how a project is built. And architects need to understand how a project goes together to be good at what they do. If understanding how steel stud buildings or wood stud buildings or mass timber framing works, and the joints and the connections and the waterproofing and all of that, is something that no longer is handled by the person doing the drafting. It's handled by the person setting up the families. And so it became sort of an obvious conclusion after having done this for several years that by moving the production and the drafting to a team that is what they are entirely focused on, has allowed for that additional room for the students fresh out of school to get real world experience right off the bat. And you're not spending the first couple of years teaching them how to draw, only to then teach them how to be architects once they've been promoted out of that drafting capacity, which is the way it worked when I first started. First couple of years were drafting, and then I started to learn about how the buildings really went together and saw what my lines ultimately meant out in the field. And so then teaching them how to critique and how to evaluate the drawings that are being produced becomes the valuable tool, as opposed to asking them to create something from whole cloth and maybe not understand what it is they're truly drawing. And the thing to remember too is those young professionals are the ones who really don't have a voice in their architecture journey. It's not until you get promoted to a certain point where you can start to really guide how you're learning, what you're doing, and making the decisions that can impact other people. So thinking about them in this way makes me feel a little bit better about myself, because, you know, I remember thinking like, oh, it would be much better if I were doing this or X or Y in my first couple of years. But ultimately, all of this brings us back to the overall firm, which more capable, and the complexity is resting in the hands of the people who are best able to deal with it. So it's not that there's less complexity, it's that there's less complexity for me, especially in the areas where I'm not an expert or proficient. And I'm able to focus on those things that I really do need to focus on. And then, you know, as we talk about this a bit more, the idea that there's this constant feedback loop. You know, it's, I mentioned it before with the learning from project to project, but every interaction, whether it's with a remote team, somebody in-house, a client, gives you a feedback loop. And we're at our best when we're learning from and incorporating the feedback that we're getting in each of those little micro feedback loops. So people, systems, technology, it's all part of that growth system. And what I found is that the more I focused on the understanding the feedback I'm getting on a minute level, the better I felt about the direction of my firm as a whole. That I'm better able to adapt quickly. You know, whether, again, small feedback loop, larger feedback loop, project to project, it's that constant improving that gets me away from what I was doing pre-COVID, which is, this is how it's done, this is how I learned it, this is how I want to do it, it's the way architecture works, to how should architecture work, and specifically, how should architecture work for me? So the ultimate goal here is to give us, the architects, the ability to really be architects. That joy that we got when we took our first design class, the idea of creating something, of driving by one of our buildings and saying, yes, I did that. That joy is something that we should all be able to really experience and know that we did our best to realize that project. And to do that, you need the right tools, and you need to really integrate those tools in a way that becomes second nature. So the bringing us full circle we've talked about some of the problems. I've talked about a lot of things that worked for me. What's one solution you think that you could start working on today to improve your practice? And that ties into the first question of what's preventing your architectural practice from becoming the practice you want it to be. And at this point, I would love to hear from everybody with some questions. We can open this up to a discussion and talk about how we can grow from communicating with each other, our teams, etc. So, Brian, do you want to take over?
Yes. So we're still waiting for people to complete the last poll.
Okay.
So the question was, as I can see, what's one solution you could fully implement today to improve your practice? I can see majority of the people have opted for freeing up time and capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Followed by improving team workflows, and then reducing firefighting. That's the option that people have selected.
Right. So I think, that we're talking about time and stress, right? How do we improve our time management or open up time to do the things that we feel will make our projects better? And importantly, how do we reduce our own stress? And I think those run hand in hand. The idea that you can spend more time on the things that are important earlier in the process, so that you're not running into the urgent questions that are being asked, say, during construction. And as I talked about adding things to our drawing sets, what I found is that my construction site meetings have gone much more smoothly. And the questions that are being asked, the contractor is able to get out further ahead of the questions he's asking. So if there's something that requires a decision by the client, we have the time, and nobody's running around trying to get a decision within the next 2 hours. I have a way I like to run my construction meetings where we talk about, like, okay, what's happening 2 weeks from now in every job, so that any questions get flushed out early in the process. There are far fewer questions now that we've been enhancing our drawing set, and that's been a function of better using the tools at our disposal, the repetitive feedback loop to enhance our project over project production, and most importantly, my time being able to focus on each individual project in a way that had been subverted in the past by the fires I was putting out on all the other projects.
That's great. So we'll wait for people to pop up with questions.
Okay. Yeah. I think getting back to the tech or tools that we adopted but never fully integrated. Mm-hmm. The project and collaboration software was the clear winner in that pool, with over 50% saying,
True.
Okay, it's the software. And in one of my past jobs, I worked for a contractor where we had this incredibly elaborate project management software. And it only worked because one of the principals had spent 50% of his time for a full year customizing the software to the company's workflow. And if you think about the resource investment into that software just to make it work for the system, that it boggles my mind. The fact that he had this much time while running umpteen construction projects blew my mind. And it was his dedication to really integrating that software into our day-to-day processes that allowed it to be functional. Because I mean, there were times where we did think, why are we even using this software? Because it's still not doing everything we need it to do. But that was after, 1,000 hours of him dialing it in for our systems. And then the other thing there is the AI tools, which right now are in the place where they promise the world and can't deliver what they're promising. And they're like, okay, we're in beta testing. Well, there's still so much growth needed to happen to fulfill the promises that we're seeing at the AIA convention or the online advertising, or when a salesperson gets a hold of us. It's just so frustrating to be like, yes, I can see where this would help, and they've almost got me ready to subscribe, and then I come back to the point of adopting versus integrating, and do I have the time and energy or personnel to truly integrate this or not? And if the answer is no, I don't, then it's a very easy no. So these are the, going back to that core question of, do I have the time, energy, and resources to integrate something new or not? And that's a very easy barometer for whether I should try something or pass on it.
That's great. So with that thought, we'd like to conclude today's session. So Alec, thank you once again for an outstanding presentation and for sharing your expertise with us today. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you for spending your time with us. On behalf of everyone at Virtual Building Studio, we truly appreciate your participation and engagement. We hope today's session has provided practical insights that you can apply on your very next project. A recording of today's webinar will be sent to all registrants shortly, so please feel free to share it with your colleagues who may benefit from the discussion. Thank you once again for joining us. We look forward to welcoming you to another Virtual Building Studio webinar in the near future. Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and have a wonderful day ahead. Goodbye.